Kenya, my home, the country where I have spent my life working with the many creatures of this beautiful land. My life has had its ups and downs like everyone else's, but throughout my family have stood by me. So too have the many people who have come together in the struggle to save and nurture this country's great wilderness. Today, Kenya stands at a crossroads. It has a population that has burgeoned from 8 million at my birth to some 40 million now. This has inevitably brought a rise in conflict between wildlife and humankind. It is essential for the human spirit and the well-being of the earth itself that every effort is made to protect and preserve its wildlife for all our descendants. I was born in Kenya, grew up on a highland farm in the Rift Valley near Gilgil. Well, in those days, animals were everywhere. They were very prolific. And we had wild animal orphans as well as domestic animals. My father had always taught me that wild animals were only on loan for as long as they were needed, and that their place was actually back in the wild. But the greatest challenge of all, of course, was the elephants. We could never actually raise the infant elephants. We were out in the bush every single day. We camped for months and months in the northern area of the park. We saw elephants every single day of our life. And, if you live in a national park and you're interested in nature, obviously if you see herds of animals every day and you study them and you watch them, you begin to learn something about them. David was 15 years older than me. He taught me all I know about wildlife, for he was an encyclopedia of life. He knew so much about elephants long before any elephant studies were ever undertaken, and taught me about these magnificent creatures, instilling a lifelong passion that I never knew would become so acute. David spoke passionately about elephant communication. The ears were, of course, their great sounding boards, picking up distant signals through sounds not audible to human ears. How else, David argued, could the elephants so obviously communicate with one another over distance, as we knew they did? He also instinctively felt that something approaching telepathy was another very real means of communication in many animals, elephants included. In 1976, it became obvious that we had a serious poaching problem in Tsavo again. The elephant herds had become visibly terrified of humans and consorting in much larger groups than normal, both classic indicators. At one time, Africa as a whole had 3.5 million elephants, which had fallen to about 500,000 in 1973. Later on, as a result of poaching in the late 70s, 80s and early 90s, it would fall to 300,000. It was a difficult time. I felt I'd lost my very centre. I think building the trust which my eldest daughter Jill helped to establish provided me with my life's purpose after David.
I lost my father at the impressionable age of 13 years old, but of course I remember him vividly. He was an extraordinary man, and everybody felt that. It didn't matter whether you worked for him or with him or were a member of the family. He was just so incredibly capable, which in those days as a park warden you had to be, because he was literally forging a national park out of virgin bush, 12,000 miles in extent, so no mean task. So every road, every bridge, every culvert, every dam, every the anti-poaching teams, all of that had to be initiated by him. I think if David were alive today, he would be incredibly proud of what Daphne, his wife, has achieved. Because in his lifetime, Daphne was a satellite to his life. I mean, she played a wonderfully supportive role, but she was actually a very shy and meek and mild lady. In the wake of his death, she has emerged this giant in terms of pursuing his dreams and visions, and making so much of his visions for the future a reality. The trust started very, very small, initially really to handle funds that had come in the wake of my father's death, people wanting to put money towards his vision and projects that he was aiming towards in his lifetime. And it was my mother that continued his legacy.
When David died, I thought I'd just have a quiet life and maybe write a few books, and children's books mainly, and do what I could for the animals that I came across. And, you know, I didn't really know what I was going to do, but it just happened upon me. I mean, you know, the orphans started coming in, the elephants started coming in. A lot of people wonder why there's so many orphans coming in these days. The answer is that most of them are orphaned through human-related problems. For ivory, the ivory trade, it causes a lot of poaching. The mother is killed, the baby is left. Human encroachment onto traditional migratory routes that the elephants have used for millions of years. Cultivation, because an elephant doesn't know the difference between a maize plant and a grass. Sometimes herds are stampeded through human-related problems and the calf is left behind. And unless that baby is found, literally within a day or two, it has no chance of life because they dehydrate very, very quickly. So when one is found and we get notice that an elephant has been found, we have to fly them back to the nursery. They would never ever stand a car journey. The keepers are there with it to give it milk and rehydration as soon as they arrive there, and then it comes back to the nursery. First I gave him some rescue remedy. Waki komadomo. Finyahi Julius komadomo yaki. Lots of them arrive in a state of collapse and have to have an infusion of a drip in the ear to revive them with dextrose and saline. And then it's a question of calming them down, getting them as happy as possible, as quickly as possible. We don't always succeed, because although we've managed to raise about 130, we've also lost many, many others that were too far gone to be able to retrieve by the time they came in. There's a lot of heartache involved in rearing the elephants, but also a lot of joy. Many of our ex-orphans now are grown up with the wild herds, having wild-born babies and bringing them back to show their keepers. So when that happens, it gives one a wonderful feeling. One really knows that one has made a difference.
We try and employ people that come from communities that border national parks, because one man's buy-in, like an elephant keeper, and the intimate knowledge he has of raising elephants can go a long way to educating his communities. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without the support of a lot of amazing men, our elephant keepers. It's funny, it starts off as a job, but somehow becomes a calling, and it's actually the elephants and their magic that they weave that just brings out the best in the men.
Well, there is a very strong relationship between a keeper and elephants. And this relationship is there because keepers that are working with these elephants are part of their family. We rotate the keepers every night. Every keeper spends a night with a different elephant every night so that they're not attached to the same person.
There must be enough keepers to represent a family. The elephant mustn't be too fond of any one person, because when that person has to take time off, then there's grief and trauma, and emotional trauma can bring on physical problems. We've since learned that with an elephant, you have to replace what that elephant would have had in the wild, which is a family. A family is the most important thing to a baby elephant. When you take on an elephant, there's no chance of giving it up. How do you give it up? When you've got something like 16 elephants in your backyard, you can't just say, well, I'm quitting. It's not an option.
After having been here for the last 11 years, I'd say, I don't feel like giving up. I feel like doing it for the rest of my life because it is really right inside me. I dream about elephants when I'm at home, so it will be difficult if I change.
Trust today is obviously best known for the Orphans Project, but actually, raising orphaned elephants in isolation would be a bit pointless. So we're so much bigger than that. We have 6 anti-poaching teams at present.
The operation itself involves a person walking in the bush looking for the snares, and obviously the person himself has to know the areas that the area that are hotspots or the areas that people are snaring.
We have different types of poachers. There are those ones which will go inside the bush to use as snares. There are others who also go to the bush to kill big animals like buffaloes and elephants. So what happens these guys when we meet with them? I mean, some of the poachers which we have been able to arrest, we have found them like, let's say with 5 different types of arrows. Like you can see here, these 3 arrows are poisoned arrows, and that's why you can see the part which has the poison is normally tied with a polythene bag, such that the poison doesn't get burnt by the sun, because this area is normally very hot.
We have a large community outreach project because obviously reaching the communities and the children and the people of tomorrow is every bit as important as raising orphaned elephants, because without their buy-in, there isn't a future for elephants in Kenya.
We also incorporated the community awareness campaign, especially we target the primary schools and also the youth. So we want these people, when they grow up, to abandon this word killing of animals.
It's all a question of education, isn't it? And in this day and age with the internet, with wonderful films, with wildlife documentaries, with access to reading and writing, there's really no excuse for information not to be disseminated far and wide.
My mother is a remarkable lady, I have to say. I often ask myself how she does what she does and how she's been able to dedicate as much as she has to doing what she does. But it comes very naturally to her.
I never really envisaged the trust to develop to be the way it is today. It just happened that way, In fact, if somebody told me right at the beginning that this would be where I would be standing in 30 years' time, I wouldn't have believed them. I think in 20 years' time the Trust will still be doing what it's doing today. It's the land that's so important. Every single square inch that you can secure for wildlife is precious. It's not just immediate family that one has given this legacy to. It's much bigger than that. And that's what makes me proud.